Yassa! We are here once again, ladies and gentlemen, for one of the final Fresh Fridays of the year. I can't even get my words out. I'm that excited. Fresh Fridays of the year. And we are very excited because it is, yes, the final episode of this season, but we have an esteemed guest, a returning guest to the show. And Liam, you did say this actually made your week, didn't it?
It's already made my week. As soon as I saw his beaming smile and his lovely and heard his lovely voice, I couldn't help but get excited for the final episode. So yes, I'm very excited to have our guest returned. No doubt about that.
Yeah, me too, mate. And I hope everyone's well who's tuning in. We know it's getting a little bit festive. I'm not gonna lie, hence the light show. So
I feel a little bit
anybody...
out of. I feel a little bit out of the loop. Like the only thing that I've got is festive is mulled wine, which I know is kind of like a throwback to season 1, but it's okay. It's okay.
How is everybody who's tuning in though? Are you guys getting festive? That's what we want to know. Slightly later time, but I think that gives you a clue as to who we're getting. If you've not already seen, we are bringing on the one, the only, Mr. Douglas Burdett. We know him from the Marketing Book podcast, but he's also the founder of Sales Artillery, a marketing company based out in Virginia, USA. And besides that, he is a friend of the show. I think that's fair to say, isn't it, Liam? He's a friend of the show.
I think last time when we had him on for the first episode, like the last season, of course, I wasn't actually physically on the stream. I was in the back end, and I've never laughed so much in a live stream. It was the most fun I've ever had. Just that was more produced, so yeah, it was a ton of fun. So yeah, hopefully we'll get some similar sort of conversations today. It should be nice.
That's it. That's exactly it. Guys, if you're watching on Facebook, do us a favor, chuck a share on it, because we actually have, ladies and gents, a giveaway. It is the season to be given, and we are giving away some juicy prizes. So you might be doing yourself a favor as well as us if you chuck a share on the stream. Get in the comments. This is an interactive session, so we want everybody to get involved with Doug and us today, because we are going to be discussing things you need to know about podcasting. It is a big old subject. We know it's important as a content tool, as a marketing tool, as a business tool these days. And as we did mention, Douglas, who is joining us, is the man, in our opinion, to ask on this, because not only has he ran over 300 episodes over the past 5 years, his podcast has been running. It's just a great show. And I think if you're interested in marketing or not, I always look to Doug's show and the way he interviews and does his research and just makes the show a special experience for the guest and the listeners. I think there's a lot of stuff to be learned there. So that's why we're welcoming him here today.
100%. There's a lot of people in chat. So we've got Ben Marshall on YouTube. We've got Sweeper on YouTube. Ken, welcome. Eddie Lopez says, "Happy Fresh Friday, freaks. Welcome." And then over on Facebook, we also have Madassa and Ben Hurrell as well. So welcome to the stream, guys. Good to see you.
Welcome. Now, Liam, regarding the giveaway, are you going to announce what the guys are going to do to win later on?
Yeah. So as Gaz mentioned, there is a giveaway this week for our Christmas episode. What that will be, we will tell you that at the end, I think. We'll keep that there. And all you need to do is drop a comment on Facebook or YouTube, put everything there, just drop a comment, and you're going to be eligible for the giveaway. So if you do that, you might win a little bundle, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. So
some nice prizes. Yes. And today, I suppose, onto the show. So today we're welcoming Doug, as we did say, and the things we're going to be discussing under the banner of things you need to know about podcasting is who should or shouldn't be setting up a podcast, the things you should know before you set one up, and also some little nuggets of success, which Doug, with his wealth of experience, will hopefully discover some of that as well. And at the end, this could be a clue to the giveaway, we will be discussing Doug's top 3 books, which should go in any marketeers or business owners stocking this year as a gift to help keep your business and your marketing on its A game in 2021. So we'll be doing that right at the end. So without further ado, ladies and gents, let's bring in our guest, introducing the one and only Mr. Douglas Burdett.
Here he is.
There he is. Welcome to the show, Doug. How are you feeling?
Let's get this party started.
Woo! Well, cheers. I know it's a slightly different time zone in Virginia, granted. However, I do believe you was drinking from a flask earlier. So what are you drinking, Doug?
Well, I was drinking some coffee, actually, but that's not the only thing that I have on the desk here at all times. As a matter of fact, and Ken Olemeyer, my friend in St. Louis, who's watching, he'll know about this. He actually, we met at a conference in Boston, and he bought me a couple of scotches. And for that, Ken, you know, I'm forever grateful. But actually, a past guest on the show actually just sent me a very nice bottle of wine. So if there's any other former guests that are on the show that are listening, you're not required by law to send me Cabernet Sauvignon, but wouldn't help if you're working on another book. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So there you go. There you go. Yeah. So I really had a lot of fun when I was on with you all earlier, and I can't believe what poor judgment you have by bringing me back. But I guess that's something all three of us have in common is, clearly poor judgment. So, let's have some fun.
Poor life judgment, but great judgment in guests. I think that's a fair assumption, Doug. We are huge fans of the podcast. We are. I'm not going to lie. And for anybody who is tuning in, I know we give you a bit of an intro with regards to the podcast. What's the driving force behind it? Because obviously you run Sales Artillery, which is a marketing company. What was the premise of building the Marketing Book podcast? Because it's such a great show.
That is a great question, and it goes beyond the business. I came, there was something that happened in my career that really bothered me, and that kind of fueled my ambition and motivation that is sort of channeled in this podcast. So I came from this advertising background. After I got out of the Army and I went up to New York City, and I worked at these enormous ad agencies for a number of years, J. Walter Thompson and Gray Advertising. And then when I started my own firm, very much advertising focused. And then as things went along, within the last 10 years or so, I started to notice things were permanently changing. And probably like a travel agent 25 years ago saying, what's the deal? How come the airlines aren't giving me a commission anymore? And how can someone book their own travel without me? So I was seeing all these changes, and advertising was being made what it is now, a shadow of its former self. It's always going to be there. And there are certain things where advertising can work well, but it's not the 800-pound gorilla. Well, I started to have to bring website people to client meetings, and more questions about social media and all these sorts of things. And I was thinking, no, I'm an ad guy. I know how to do this ad thing. But I could see that was all starting to change, and I was starting to feel really irrelevant, like I was growing dinosaur scales. And it really bothered me, probably more than the average person. And so I went back to, I stepped up reading more books because I was trying to figure out where all this is going, because this whole ad game was starting to go away. And I stumbled upon David Meerman Scott's first or second edition of The New Rules of Marketing and PR. I read a lot of books, but I stumbled upon that and I thought, oh, that's where all this is going. It was very clear, and I understood it. And it was sort of like maybe 500 years ago, someone might have been thinking that the sun revolves around the earth, but then they finally figure out that the earth actually revolves around the sun. And it all came together for me. And I said, oh, I felt like I had another bite at the career apple. And I quickly went in that direction. And it's where we all are now. But I kind of had to go in the wilderness there for a while. And I said, I don't want to be in another situation where I just feel blindsided and I don't
Mm.
have any sense at all what's going on. So I kept reading the books and I would listen to marketing podcasts. And this is back when we would plug them in, the iPod into the computer before the iPhone came out and that type of thing. And I would love listening to interviews with authors of marketing books for some reason. And I just thought, I think I want to try this podcasting thing. Probably a lot of the people that are listening in here are thinking, yeah, maybe I'll try this podcasting thing. And I saw that marketingbookpodcast.com was available. And I took that on a sign from High that I ought to try this. And so I had already read a number of these books and I met a number of these authors at conferences, not that they would all remember me. And I made 11 videos pitching an author saying, hey, we met. I'm the one that you had to get the restraining order against. But I would like you to be one of the first guests on my show. What do you think? And, I've ultimately interviewed all 11 of them. One of them, it took me 200 episodes to be able to finish that list. But I started doing that. And so I that's kind of the motivation. If I were doing this right, I would be doing a podcast just for manufacturers or industrial companies. I may still do that because that's who we like to work with. But this is more like a Blues Brothers mission from God, where I love being able to read these books and I like being able to talk to the author. But the biggest reward is, I hear from people around the world now. There's downloads and there's listeners in over 150 countries last time I checked. And I hear from listeners almost every day saying, hey, I've been listening to your podcast for the last couple of years or just found it. And I love it. It's really helpful. And then a lot of people ask me, what's the book I could about this or that? Because I don't want anyone, not even you guys, to have to read 300 books or 400 books to be able to find the right one or two that might help you right now. And there's nothing better than knowing that you're helping somebody. So this is something that I kind of do on the side. This is my occupational hobby, but I like doing it. So that's a long-winded answer as to why I started the podcast.
Such an amazing story. Like it's quite inspirational actually, because you've seen this. You were in this industry before and you sort of look at it now like, and what the hell's going on? And, you're sort of reading these books to share that knowledge. It's such a good thing to do. Like I think we said last time, actually, off air after our last one, I don't do that much reading. Like I think I've probably read about 10 books in my lifetime. Maybe not even 10. And some of the content on your podcast is really useful. And even the things that you do on social, like the jokes you tell yourself when reading a book, I love that.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. Look at those. And the thing is, sometimes I read that sentence and I'm like, oh, what book is that? And I look into it and then, consider it and all that type of stuff. So it is absolutely amazing. Ken, who was in chat, who you shouted out earlier on, has actually said, seriously, Doug, how many books do you even read? Do you read in a year? How many books do you read in a year?
Oh, probably not that many more than there are weeks in the year. So, I mean, there's 52, but then there's other books that I'll read. So I don't know, somewhere between that number and 75. I mean, it's a book a week. And then sometimes I'll read a book and the interview will fall through. And a couple times I have read the book, did the interview, and it was a terrible interview. A couple times, believe it or not, I figured out that the author didn't write the book. I liked the book, I read it, and then when I'm doing the interview, I know more about the book than the author did. So
That's so awkward,
I've kind
isn't
of
it?
yeah, it's kind of weird when I know the book better than they do, and They were really good books too, but some ghostwriter wrote them. But it was like, anyway, that was kind of weird. So that's why there's more than just those. I do get a lot of books from publishers and publicists and authors and things like that, and I look through it and I have to decide: is it a book that I want to read? Is it a topic that kind of excites me? Is it a topic I want to learn more about? And believe it or not, I tend to have books from major publishers. And the reason why is because there are a lot more people involved in the production of the book, which means it's generally, I hate to say this because I've had some self published books on the show, they tend to be better written and they're much better edited.
Mm.
Would you ever judge a book by its cover, Doug? If one arrived and it had like a bit of a scrappy title or a bit of a shoddy bit of graphics on the front, are you a bit of a graphic snob? Because I am. that's me.
No, I don't know that I'm a graphics snob, but graphics are very, very powerful. And despite what somebody will tell you, most decisions are made with the subconscious, and then our rational brain is what is the PR department to tell us why we made the right decision. If I see a book, and there have been some where I don't think they even went to Fiverr to get a book design, a book cover design, but absolutely, I judge a book by its cover. All those things go into it, and here's the other thing, and I don't mean to sound like I'm drunk with power because I'm not. I'm just a knuckleheaded podcaster, but the only concern I had when I started the show is that I don't really think there'd be 52 marketing books published every year. A couple and some other people had said, Doug, I'm not sure about that. And well, there are evidently there's hundreds and hundreds, but what's happened now is I have heard some listeners say, I will definitely consider buying that book if it's been on your show. And I'm thinking, oh man, I can't handle this pressure. So now I'm spending a lot of time trying to, make sure it's going to be a good reading experience for the listener as well. And again, these are really nice problems to have, but I don't want to let down the listeners. And so that's kind of a funny thing that developed. It's like so many things when you're creating something, you never know quite where it's going to go. I mean, when you guys started this Fresh Friday, you probably never realized just how bad and unsuccessful it was going to be to the point where you had to have me on a second time.
Too true, Doug. Too true.
It's definitely not true. Great name as well. Andre Lund. I do like that name. Andre Lund. He was saying, and it's the same reason, Doug, I listen to your podcast almost religiously, is it saves people such a ton of time. And that is, I suppose it formed us some inspiration as well. Like we don't go to the lengths you do. We don't read books and then bring on the authors. That is a lot of work. And I think Liam and I don't sign up to that much work when it comes to Fresh Friday. However, I think the what we get from listening to your podcast is that shortcut, and that's the element we kind of sprinkled into Fresh Friday, by bringing on Douglas Burdett, by I suppose getting your tips on something like podcasting. That's the element that we're trying to share. It's like whoever watches Fresh Friday, similar to your show, it's about giving people that head start, that inspiration that they might not get from reading 50 books. They might just need that little short step.
Yeah, there might just be one or two that can make a big difference. There are two books, looking back on my career, there are two books that had an enormous impact on my career, just two books. But so that's why the right book at the right time can make an enormous difference. And I'm hoping that people who listen to my show, maybe they're facing a certain challenge and they listen to an interview, or they ask me, what's a book I could read about this specific topic? I send them a link to the interview, or I tell them about the book if I haven't interviewed the author, and I'm hoping, well, maybe that makes a big difference. And I've had some examples of listeners who've said, yeah, that really helped a lot. Things like, I got that job.
So good.
That's amazing. That's what you want to hear, isn't it? And that keeps you going, keeps you motivated, keeps the reason why you want to do stuff like that, helping people in all them different ways. Guys, Let us know what you're thinking. Keep your comments coming in. Get this stream shared out because we're about to delve into, I suppose, the depth of the conversation, which we're here to do. Now, we tend to do the fresh fire round right now, but I think we should keep on the subject of podcasting because we've already gone in there, and we'll do that at the end, Doug, if that's okay with you. No disadvantage, and I know everybody
Your
wants to
show,
win.
your rules. Yeah,
I think it just makes sense. So
Yeah, I agree.
on the subject, and I know we have gone into it a little bit there, but with podcasting in general, I think there is a big question out there around, should everyone be doing a podcast? So I suppose our question to you is, who should or shouldn't be doing a podcast in your opinion?
I would say that not everyone should be doing podcasting. There's I think there's over 1 million podcasts now. And frankly, as a podcaster, if all of you other podcasters would stop your shows, I would appreciate it. Anyone that wants to establish credibility and authority and awareness with a certain niche, there's an opportunity that might make sense for you to do that. You have to. I would suggest that if you're not a podcast listener, you probably shouldn't go start a podcast because you may not appreciate what it is. Don't do it unless you are ready to do it for the long term. So, for instance, it may be helping my business. It certainly helps me with my podcast, and we get a lot of ideas from every book, and I'm able to use it from clients or for us or whatever. And I know I'm helping people. But according to Libsyn, one of the leading podcast hosting services, most podcasts never make it to episode 8. Okay, so why do you think that is? It's because people haven't thought about, well, who is it I'm trying to reach? What is this topic? I think it's a lot of times, so this is part of the reason who shouldn't start it. There's this notion of check the box marketing, which, oh, let's set up a Snapchat. Let's set up a TikTok channel. I don't know, whatever the kids are doing these days. You guys can talk about this. But it's like, oh, let's do an event. Oh, let's do a blog. And I think I read that most corporate blogs, ultimately, all blogs, they never make it past 5 blog posts. It's sort of like, oh, let's have a podcast. And I've heard some podcasts where they're kind of trying it out. They're not too committed to it. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make with podcasting is they're not thinking about the most important thing, which is your audience. It's maybe all about them, and they're not thinking about, it's the same thing with marketing. People that have fairly worthless marketing are not thinking about their customers' latent anxieties and desires. They're not thinking, what do these people want? What would they find helpful? I mean, I'm just lucking out because I read a book and I think, oh, this is surprising me. I'm going to ask about that. Or this is something that I know a lot of people are struggling with. And I've heard clients say this over the years. Let me ask about that. It never hurts to repeat these kind of things. So that's why I'm stumbling into creating something that's helpful for listeners. But I think that people who don't have a good idea of what their niche is or who their listener is, they struggle with podcasting.
It's really interesting because we've worked in a couple of teams that have either done podcasting or looked to start podcasting. Do you think a lot of people get focused on the stuff that doesn't matter? Do you think they're like, I guess it depends on the person, but you said about finding your audience. I know a lot of people that are just like, let's get a mic, let's get a field recorder, and let's just record. And it's kind of
Let's
like,
just go.
yeah, and it's kind of like, like the planning that's got to go into it to figure all this stuff out. I think the people that just go and buy the kit and do it are probably the people that attribute to that episode 8 metric, right? They just like buy it, try it, that's it.
Yeah, it's the same mentality as, since this is that time of year, people who will join, well, maybe not this year, but people who would join a health club or a gym at the beginning of the year, thinking, now that's gonna do it for me. That's gonna help me to feel better and maybe lose weight or something. Uh, the problem is you actually have to go to the gym and do the work. Everyone seems to forget that. The same thing with somebody who, like a company that maybe they don't have let's talk about like a CRM or some sort of software, whatever they think, we need to get better at whatever. So let's buy a piece of software. Let's buy a tool, and that's going to give us the process. Well, that rarely works. In other words, the tool should help the process you already have. The tool does not create a process. So the same thing happens with with equipment. One of the questions I get all the time is what equipment should I have? And even that presentation it's funny, I did a presentation at the beginning of this year in January, a live presentation to a group because they wanted to know about podcasts, a bunch of PR people. And that was the last presentation because this quarantine happened. But it was like, I had this one screen. I'm happy to share the link to those slides, but it's like, this is all the equipment you need to get started. It's very inexpensive. I have a nice mic here, but I've been doing it a long time. And, but I think that the worst thing is somebody goes and buys the equipment first when, really you should be thinking about, why am I doing this? What is my expertise? Do I want to have an interview show? Do I want to do all the speaking? What how am I helping my audience? What is my real passion or my real interest? Like I described you, what kind of motivates me. So the worst thing you could do is go buy the equipment first before thinking this through. And then I would suggest that people buy very inexpensive equipment until after you've gotten past episode 8.
It's so true. Like people just go, I need a 500 sound super important on a podcast. I need a $500 mic. I need the best in the business. They spend all this, they spend thousands of pounds on all this stuff, and then they get to episode 8 and it just starts gathering dust. It's classic.
Yeah, for the first 200 or so episodes, I was using what I think at the time was a $55 dynamic mic called an ATR 2100. Great mic. And I finally got this nicer one, and then I gave the ATR 2100 to a friend of mine who was starting a podcast, and she couldn't find that one because all these mics were suddenly very expensive or not available. But that was all I needed. And then on this presentation I have, and if anybody wants those slides, let's do this. Anybody that wants those slides, just message me on LinkedIn, and I'll send you the link, and I'll give it to you guys as well. But there's just a few other very small costs associated with doing a podcast. It's really very inexpensive. That's where podcasting is a great example of, it's really very much about the content rather than the barriers to entry.
I think
audio quality is important though.
Yeah, and I think it always comes back to, whether it's a podcast or not, whether it's any marketing endeavor, it always comes back to that idea of strategy versus tactics. And Mr. Andy Starr, who did not mess around when he did this on Fresh Friday, it is one of them typical mistakes that people make, I think, where they're looking at these tactics. You can see where the pressure's coming from. You've got like Gary Vee on stage going, you have to start a podcast. Audio's the thing everyone needs to be doing. If you're not doing audio on 5 channels every single day, you're going to be a loser. And then, like we're sat at home, like marketeers, like, shit, Gary Vee said I should have been doing this 5 years ago. I'm already losing. Like, I need to get this out and over the mark. And I think where you see Gary Vee, and I'm not picking on Gary Vee, I think he's really cool, and I do like the guy. But I think where marketers see this kind of presence, and someone saying, like an influencer saying, you need to be doing X, Y, and Z, you also need to then think, right, he's doing that, but he's doing that because he's trying to inspire and get you to do something that you might not have done before. It doesn't mean that you just, throw your eggs in that basket because someone said so, and not do your due diligence and educate yourself, learn how the program works. And like you said, become a fan of podcasting yourself.
Doug,
Yeah.
was there a time in your podcast where you got to that episode 8 region and you were like, nothing's happening? Was there like a low for you or anything that you were just like, do I keep going? Like, were people listening straight away? Like, how long did it take before it sort of really took off?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I just enjoyed doing it so much that, that I didn't really. I didn't. Again, I probably didn't do this right. I didn't have some measurable ROI and lead gen approach to
That's the
doing
secret,
it.
though. I think I really do. I think that's the
But I
secret.
did it because I enjoy doing it and I like doing it. And if it's like you hear with content or exercise or whatever, since January of 2015, almost 6 years now, every Friday, I just published an interview. So people say, "Well, how did you do it?" Well, I showed up. I just kept doing it. So, I mean, things have happened where things that I didn't really expect or know. I mean, I would have done this anyway. Okay, so I probably am a little more on the side of just I want to do this because I want to do it, but I think that and this is a word that's often misused or misunderstood in marketing. Um, there needs to be a little bit of a purpose to it, and I guess I've described what my purpose is. I get a good feeling knowing I'm helping people, and I'm learning so much, and I just never wanted to be in another situation where I was completely out of touch with what was going on. So I don't think there was ever a point where I said I'm going to give up. I'm going to quit doing this. Um, so, but that's a good question, and I think that the to do it right, you probably should have some have some goals or something like that. But you do need to enjoy what you're doing and feel that you're helping. If you are working for a company and the boss, this is what's called management by in-flight magazine. The boss comes in on Monday morning and throws that in-flight magazine on the conference room table and says, "Why don't we have a podcast? Do a podcast and get that TikTok thing going too." You know, it's not gonna work.
Mm.
I think you really hit the nail on the head there, where you have to find some kind of passion in it. Like, you learn yourself from reading these books, so that's a tick list for you personally. We learn from
Mhm.
speaking to people like yourself on Fresh Friday, so that's a tick list for us. And then we know that our viewers, our audience, get something from it as well, because we get the comments, and we get that kind of feedback. So I think as long as you've got that kind of even like from a selfish level, if you take all the business metrics out of it, from a selfish level, I think if you're personally invested in the show, the production, I think that really goes a long way, and that gets you over them tough times. We're in our infancy, we're in our season 2, we're ignoring the figures and the people who are viewing, because we know that this is something that we're passionate about, right? So you've got to see it through for them reasons, I think. And where you said you didn't start with a marketing goal and we need to get this many people at this time, I think that's where the best stuff kind of comes from, in my opinion.
Yeah. Let me mention another benefit of podcasting. Um, and it's a great example of there was a book on the show. I'll say that all the time. There was a book on the show, but there was one called Content Based Networking by James Carberry, who is the CEO of Sweetfish Media. They do the B2B growth show. And it was a very popular podcast. And James Muir and I actually do a monthly show about the recent books that have been on the Marketing Book Podcast. And his book was about how effective creating content with somebody is to network with them and get to know them. So there was a guest on the show several years ago, Scott Ingram, a friend of mine, and he's at the time he was working in sales. He's still a salesman, and he has a very popular sales podcast now. But he was working for a enterprise level event company they created enterprise software for large events. Okay, so he wrote a book called "Making Rain with Events," and that's how I got to know him. And I think he had been listening to the show, and then he also had a podcast where he was interviewing people, event organizers from large events. Okay, so
Yeah.
some of those people he was interviewing might have been their customers who were using the software, but that clearly wasn't the focus of the interview. He was talking about what are the challenges and the solutions to doing a large event. It's very hard work. It's very complicated. These people I hope they're well paid. But he was also he was getting to know them. He might have been talking to people who were prospects, mm, or not, but he was also just talking to everybody that he should be talking to. He was networking, and everyone knew him as the guy with this, from the software company, and he was talking to them about doing large events. So that's a great example of, and now he's since left that company, and I don't know if that podcast continues, but he's since gone on to others where he's done this other podcast where he interviews the very top sales performers. I can't remember exactly what the qualification is, but you have to have documented that you're like in the top 1% of selling for your organization. What an
Yeah.
interesting show, you know? So he's talking to those kinds of people. So that's a benefit. So let's say, um, you know, you don't need the biggest audience. You just need the right audience. And that's true
Mm.
whether it's in podcasting or any kind of content marketing. One other mistake that everybody seems to make with marketing, maybe it's going to be this way forever, but they they're very promotional. Okay, they're talking about themselves. I if you're not talking about my problems or something I'm interested in, I'm just not going to listen. I don't have to. You can't interrupt me. I have to subscribe. It's permission based marketing. And there was a great quote from Craig Davis, who used to be the creative director at J. Walter Thompson, where I used to work. And he said, he probably said this 10 years ago, but he said, we can no longer interrupt what people are interested in. We have to be what people are interested in. So
So true.
a lot of people that are starting podcasts, they want to talk about themselves and that sort of thing. And that's probably where some of the other frustration is. Maybe that's why a lot of them don't make it to episode 8. So excuse me while I step down off my soapbox.
No, preach, Doug. You know this is a platform for that. We have a similar saying. To be fair, like we often talk about in some of our conversations that we have with clients, like, why are you so obsessed with ads when you can be the whole show? Like, that is the opportunity that the world's presenting itself with. There's why be a speck, a moment in time on somebody else's broadcast when you can actually be the broadcast. And sometimes that's a
Yeah.
light bulb movement, sometimes it's not, but it's definitely our mantra
But
as
those,
well. That's what
we don't live in a world of media gatekeepers anymore. You can create your own audience. Even a knuckleheaded podcaster can create an audience with millions of downloads in countries around the world. I didn't have to go through a radio company to do that sort of thing. Also, in Facebook and YouTube, I put a link to those slides in case anyone wants to find those from that
yeah, we've
presentation I
seen.
did 100 years ago, January of 2020. Joke about how long
Feels
this
like
year
it.
seems to
It does
have
feel
been.
like it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult. And let me mention a book called Content DNA by John Asperian. I don't know if you all know him or met him. He lives in South Wales. And just warning, Gareth, he's a big Liverpool fan. Okay.
Oh, not
I've
this
already
again.
connected with man. We are
And
getting him on Fresh Friday, ladies and gents. So that'll be a fun one. Yeah,
are
we've
you
got
going
a
to
lot of
interview
time.
John Asperian?
Yeah, and it was from your interview. I 100% see eye to eye with where he's coming from. Not on football taste. Let's just get that clear. But
Oh,
definitely
did
in
you
his
already
vision
interview him?
for. No, we've not had him on yet. We're actually trying to get him for
Okay.
last season, but we're going to get him in for next season. If you're watching, John, you're definitely coming on. And yeah, we verbally
He's
agreed.
well, let's make sure we get John Asperian on. And I interviewed him about his book the day after Liverpool uh, clinched the championship. And he was exhausted because he'd been out setting cars on fire all night. No, he didn't do that. He's a great guy. But in his book,
what have you done? He's gone. He's gone.
So anyway,
I wouldn't do that.
He talks in his book about how at the very beginning of the book, I loved how he did this, where he said, okay, like your point, Gareth, you're making. He said, he's a fantastic writer and content expert and a real expert on LinkedIn. Everyone should connect with him on LinkedIn, but include a message when you connect with him, or he's not going to connect with you. He's a big deal on LinkedIn. And he said, okay, well, basically at the beginning of the book, he had this sort of thing like, people say, all right, content boy, what do I need content for? Why don't I just run ads? And he beautifully explains, he goes, okay, even if you're going to run ads, and ads can certainly work well in certain instances, just not like they used to, you still need content. So in other words, someone who's doing, let's say, pay-per-click on Google, if you are sending someone to your homepage, you're not going to do very well. But instead, if you say, if you have some better idea of context, like if based on the keyword they're looking for, you kind of have an idea of what might be helpful content for them, advertise that on pay-per-click. Here's a guide to how to hire a whatever or buy this, and send them to a specific landing page. You still have to create that content. So even if you want your advertising, particularly digital advertising, to work well, you should have great content. And then, of course, if you create really helpful content that your customers would say thank you for, your sales team should be using that. They like stuff. So, yeah. And like I said, I'm a former ad guy. And if advertising still worked as well as it did for much of my career, this guy would still be doing it.
That's it. That's exactly it. Liam, have we got anything else coming in from chat? I know we've not connected for a while. Are we all good there?
Yeah, all good. So we got Jefferson, who's joined over on YouTube. So welcome to the stream, Jefferson. And Ken has also said, even more important today with post-COVID and COVID is also empathy, which I think we can all agree with as well.
Yeah, Ken and I've had conversations about that, and I've given talks about that. But empathy, for me, dollar for dollar, it's the most important word in sales and marketing. And I'm required by law to remind everyone, empathy is not sympathy or compassion or pity. A completely different thing. Empathy is simply the ability to put yourself in that other person's mindset or walk in their shoes for just a bit. And in my experience, when marketing and sales have just a little bit of empathy, it's like so much of this. You don't have to be perfect at it. You just have to be a little bit better than your competition. It really gives you an unfair advantage. So if you focus on problems if you focus on the customer problem, they will listen to information about your product. If you start with talking about your product and services, you're basically invisible. You're not going to get their attention. They don't care, as David Meerman Scott will say, nobody cares about your product or service except you. They care about themselves. And I say that as an observation, not a criticism. Human beings are self-oriented, which is how we have evolved over however many years. It's kept us alive. So you're concerned if you are able to have some empathy, like Ken Ohlmeyer is talking about. I can't believe how well that breaks through from a marketing and sales standpoint.
Yeah, and people, everybody's guilty of it. Liam and I recently have just been guilty of it ourselves. Like, it's so easy to fall into the habit of protect, defend, or attack, rather than just take a step back just for one moment and think, what is the client going through right now? What is the client feeling? Or what is the customer going through? And That's where the secrets to success is. It's like, make them the hero. You are not the hero. You're the knight who might die on the few daggers that come in to protect the king.
Yeah, and this came up in the episode that published today, which is December 18th. There's a book, so it's episode 310, Unfiltered Marketing by Paul Leinberger and Stephen Denny. And they talk about this research they've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years. And it talked about how, in the book, it talked about how if you're the hero of your marketing or sales, it's even more ineffective now than it was 5 years ago. And their book was about the research shows how truly skeptical people are now, even more than a year ago. And that if you are raw or unfiltered, just like we're doing here, they talked about how you're going to see a lot more live streaming from companies, and people are suspicious of slick. They want the information themselves, and the only people they trust are themselves. It's a fascinating book, but it talked about how you need to sort of come in as if you're saying you want to sit down next to the customer and say, let me help you. Let me provide you some context. Like I was just saying about doing good pay-per-click, it's sitting down and saying, here's what you need to know. Teaching is the new pitching.
Doug, I know we've covered a few things there. If anybody's out there and they've already set up a podcast and they're already running one, like, do you have any tips on how they can kind of accelerate what they're doing, maybe get better ROI from what they're doing in some way? Like, what's the way they can grow from your experience?
Well, first off, there are a lot of great resources online. There's John Lee Dumas has a whole course. Pat Flynn has a lot of great information. There's a variety of other terrific content creators out there talking about what you should do. If somebody is stagnating, one of the first things I would ask is, who are you creating this for? Who is your audience? Could you possibly become a little more niche? Niche until it hurts. Have you, discoverability is an issue for podcasts. So are you doing, there's no silver bullet. Like when I produce a podcast, well, this is a little bit different, but I use we use Teamwork, and I just have a template set up, and then there's 50 steps. Now, most of that is, so I don't forget to do this, do that. And a year or two ago, I started editing my own episodes because I'd heard from a pro that you actually become a better interviewer if you edit your own. You can get help on the other stuff, but you really ought to edit your own. And it's true. It's true. It's funny. But there's the social media, there's social sharing. If it's a guest based podcast, could you encourage your guests to share the content? Can you, another great way to get more, I assume you're asking about more downloads, which is, a metric you have, get yourself on other podcasts and talk about it. But rather than, I shouldn't say talk about it, but get yourself on other podcasts and deliver a lot of value. So those are some things to do. I mean, you could even do, I was just listening to some podcasts recently, and Jordan Harbinger, who I believe his podcast is The Art of Charm, or maybe it's just the Jordan Harbinger. He's advertising on other podcasts. I'm not saying you should do that, starting out, but it's I'll just give you another little guide trick. You got to offer value. When I started the podcast, I wrote a blog post, and it was the top marketing podcasts for marketers who want to become CEOs. And it was based on some research that I had read about why you may start to see more CEOs come from the marketing field. Like in the past, they might have come from finance or accounting or engineering or production. And I had a list of podcasts on there. Well, people were looking for marketing podcasts. They started to find that. And that's, helped them discover not only my podcast, because it was on my website, but it was others, other people. other podcasts. So there's a number of things where you can do, but I think the main thing, and it's the hard thing, it's like, who is this for? There are a lot of podcasts where they're not quite sure about why they're doing the podcast or who it's for. Um, you may want to get some feedback. There's a marketing podcast I listened to a couple years ago, and I had to stop listening to it because basically, I think it's still pretty popular, but the host was reading everything, every episode. And I just thought, this is just something I didn't care for that. And actually, there's a number of history podcasts I'm always trying to find more history podcasts. And there were several where they were simply reading uh, prepared text. And I don't know, I just didn't find that helpful. I don't know. So
It's so
I
I
hope
think
that's helpful. But
it's also one of them things as well. Like it's the same with radio. Like when it's when you know it's organic, to use that word. I know this is live, which is slightly different, but even if it's been slightly edited, that's not the issue. I think as long as you know the conversation's real, I think
Mm.
that expectation of not entirely knowing where it's going to go, I think that adds to a lot of it. I think one of your guests who was on recently, I do mistake his name, so forgive me, but they were talking about great virtual events and the difference between that. And I think one of the tips I learned
oh,
about
that
that,
was
and it's
David
something
Behrman
that
Scott.
was it David?
His book,
Right.
Standout
Yeah.
Virtual Events. Yeah.
Oh,
That was
we're
one of the
actually going to
books
mention that
that would definitely needed to be written this year.
And yeah, I think one of the main things was, the idea that when you're doing something in that format, you need to lean into that format. Like this is not a podcast. It could lend itself to podcast essentially, but this is more of a video thing, like a live stream thing. And like with that, if it is just audio, I think you've really got to lean into it. I think like back to some of the most successful old radio shows where there's a lot of description going on. I think you've got to be in that zone. You've got to really adapt to that format, whether it's a live event, a podcast, visual, not visual. I think you've got to embrace it. Is what I'm saying.
Hmm. Yeah, what you're talking about was a very interesting thing from that book, Standout Virtual Events, where he was explaining that live events have a lot in common with live theater. Think of it.
Yeah.
Virtual events have much more to do with television. And the
Yeah.
problem is that, particularly this year, as companies that may have had a live event, they struggled to make something of it and maybe provide value in a virtual format. It's like they were trying to make a live event on the computer when actually you kind of need to engineer it a different way and look at what works well on television, which is why he was explaining in the book that YouTubers can often be better at virtual events than people who are fantastic at live events. And he tells the story of a famous he didn't name him, but the speaker who maybe gets 50,000 a speech, terrible at virtual event, did not make the transition at all. And that's where it was similar to when television first came out. Apparently, it was a camera inside a radio studio, and you would see actors in front of a microphone with scripts, and there might have been an orchestra playing in the background. It was basically, let's form fit the last medium into this new one. And then over
Yeah.
time, radio figured out what worked better. So the same thing is happening this year with companies that are realizing uh, live events do not translate very well to the computer. There's a lot more you can learn about how effective television works to make for a virtual event. We'll stop here, but another funny thing he had in the book was a virtual event should not be a series of TED Talks. Meaning, virtual events have a lot of interactivity. So we're able to look at things like comments from Ken Olmeyer and Daryl Amy, Revenue Growth Engine. They're able to interact. We're able to ask them questions. I was able to put my slides there. I'm sure there's other things we're probably not doing right, but you really need to focus on the interactivity of the platform for a virtual event.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And we've come up against that a lot, I suppose. Recently, we do a little bit of that, and I think getting that into the head of the client is super critical, because I think one thing I will say about us marketeers, which is very British. I know you corrected us on that before, Douglas, but
Yeah,
marketeers.
no, I didn't
Anybody,
correct you. I remarked that British people always use
remarks.
that term, and I find it delightful.
Marketeer.
Very nice. Marketeers. I mean, you can never forget that it is your duty, even if it's a little bit difficult sometimes to explain that to a client, you should try and guide them through that. You know, if you're being enlisted to create a virtual event or a podcast or whatever it is, and it does require engagement, make sure you get that conversation in, because just bowing down to the client and kind of saying, you know, yeah, if you don't want engagement, let's ignore it, or if you don't want interactivity, we can scrap that bit. You know, it is an important sector in a virtual event, so make sure you try and negotiate them waters politely.
Oh,
Situation where you are working with a client and they just want you to do what they say, that relationship's probably not going to last that long because
back on in a sec. How bizarre. Ah, there we go. We're back. Apologies about that, ladies and gents. Not sure what actually happened there. That was very peculiar.
I think
Computer's getting ready for Christmas, mate. That's what's happening. It's getting excited. It can smell the mince pies. It is literally ready to go.
I don't think people can handle Doug's freshness.
Yeah,
in all
maybe.
honesty, I think fresh moves, making some fresh moves. Ladies and gents, if you are back with us, welcome back. So yeah, we were just recapping there on what Doug was discussing and do a few things. I think the main bit really was around podcasting and how you should set one up. We covered all sorts of things about mainly like just make sure there's some passion there. I think that was the big takeaway for me. Make sure that you actually
He's back.
do it for a reason beyond business metrics was one of the things we covered. And I suppose we're just closing out, aren't we, with the potential of the fresh fire round next. So if Doug is back,
There he
I'm
is.
back. And I've got all kinds of
You broke the internet, Ken
powered
saying.
internet connection. I just finally hit refresh, and but you know, hadn't folks heard enough from me already? So I think it was fine from on. Zip
you
it.
need to put £1 in the meter, mate. Just an extra £1. There we go.
Yeah.
I think, to be fair, Doug, there's been so much once again that we've covered, and any of our viewers will appreciate all the goodness that has gone into this episode. I think so far there's a few people jumping back in now, so welcome back, ladies and gents.
Thank you. And I think I says I'm breaking the internet.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
smashing it to pieces.
A lot of comedians listen to the Marketing Book podcast.
Yeah, I think a good way for us to close out. I know we did touch on the books there. One of the books that you was going to recommend, we've already mentioned, but maybe we just go through them as like some headlines, and then we'll finish with the keep it fresh round,
real quick.
With the fresh fire round. So, Liam, I think you've got a sexy transition to play, haven't you, for this bit?
I do indeed, and it is coming right now.
There you go.
Ah,
there we go. And we got rid of Doug.
There he is. He's back. Oh.
So, Doug, we have asked.
I hope the viewers appreciate there's no charge for that special graphic from Liam.
Free of charge. You take it. You take it home.
You're welcome, people. Thank Liam.
Yeah, thank Liam. The thing we was going to ask around these 3 books for any marketeer or somebody who is maybe buying for somebody who is a business owner or someone working in marketing, what are them 3 books that you think will help propel them into 2021?
It's tricky to say because, people say, "What's the best book?" I like all the books because I get to pick which ones I I read and talk to the authors about. But there are, I'll suggest these 3. One of them I've mentioned, and that's, David Meerman Scott. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's just number 1, not 1 minute.
Oh, okay, number 1, sorry.
Bad cue.
What the viewers can't see is that Garrett is sitting there going, "Thanks, Garrett, appreciate it." The New Rules of Marketing and PR by David Meerman Scott, but read the 7th edition. So that's one of 2 books that have had the biggest impact on my career. The other one was in the 1980s book called, Ogilvy on Advertising by David Ogilvy. And that's what sent me into advertising. But the New Rules of Marketing and PR, I've interviewed David Meerman Scott about a couple of those editions, the 6th and 7th edition. Every 3 years or so, he updates it. And it's so fascinating to see what chapters get dropped and what new chapters there are. It's almost like that's such a great book. And it's, I recommend it probably every week to somebody, based on, that's a great book. A lot of new graduates. It's in about 30 languages now. It's an international bestseller. So I recommend The New Rules of Marketing and PR. It's just a great book. And you can, as I talked to you earlier, it had such an impact on me. Another book that is one of my favorites is by Marcus Sheridan. It's called They Ask, You Answer. And I know, Daryl Amy is he's a fan of the book too. In fact, I should mention, I'm going to sneak in a 4th one. Daryl Amy, who's one of the guests, he wrote The Revenue Growth Engine, and I love this book. And we'll give you a link to. It's a terrific book, and he talks about a lot of the same books that I talk about. But They Ask, You Answer by Marcus Sheridan. Make sure to read the 2nd edition. He added 100 more pages specifically about video and your website. And basically, that's the story of the guy who had a failing pool business during the real estate crash of 2008. At the end of his rope, about to declare bankruptcy, he said, "I don't even have any money left for advertising. What am I going to do?" He started answering every question on his website that he'd ever gotten from a customer. Within 1 year, this is a few years ago, #1 pool site in the world, simply by answering questions. What does a pool cost? So this ties in so much of what we were talking about, empathy. People started to trust him more because he was simply answering their questions. And there's a dearth of that in the business world, of just answer their questions. So They Ask, You Answer, 2nd edition. And the 3rd book that I recommend, which is one that was on the show not too long ago, was Myths of Marketing by Grant Lieboff, who lives in Bushy, which is in the Watford area. So he's a Watford fan, and he's a little saddened because I think they got relegated. And I just hope everyone here in America appreciates how I'm able to kind of sound like I know what I'm talking about as it relates to English Premier League.
Good.
But this book, Myths of Marketing, I just loved it. And it was a great interview. And if anyone wants a link to it, you can go to marketingbookpodcast.com or just message me and I'll send it to you. But what he did, and this is part of a series by Kogan Page, the London-based publisher, called Myths. So I interviewed Michelle Carville about her book, Myths of Social Media, which it was fantastic as well. But what happened here in this book is that Grant Lieboff, he compiled 26 myths. But in the interview, he says, there were probably 75, but he was able to boil down the what he thinks are the biggest myths of marketing. Now, what do we mean by myths? For me, it was the great misunderstanding of what marketing is and isn't and what it's capable of doing. And, anyone that's seen the movie Zoolander, where he says, "I feel like I'm taking crazy pills." As I was reading through the book, I thought, oh man, I'm dealing with this every week, this stupid misperception about one thing or another. And so the book turned into sort of an emotional support group for me. And I really enjoyed it. And here's why the book can be particularly helpful for marketers or agency guys like us, is that as an effective marketing person, you're really a leader, even though it may not say that on your business card, but you're trying to lead your organization, just like you were talking about, Gareth, where if a client is asking for something, that's what they want, but what they need may be slightly different. So you need to help lead them, maybe help them discover where they need to go and what they need to do. And so are these myths are really helpful for a marketer to read and understand, because these are a lot of the perceptions that are out there. Because your colleagues aren't stupid, they just don't know as much about marketing as you do, and they think of marketing as still, sort of the promotion, like back in my ad guy days. So I would suggest Myths of Marketing, great book, very, very well sourced. And then the other one was definitely Revenue Growth Engine. Part of that, I could go on forever, but marketers who are not connected in any way to revenue, and that goes for the perception of what you're doing as a marketer, you're not going to do very well. So whatever you can do, that's where I often say, marketers, you need to be careful what you say around civilians. And by civilians, I mean anyone not in the marketing department. Be very, very careful if you are using words like branding, storytelling, content marketing. You're not helping yourself. And I've got all kinds of books that I've read that talk about that. And the books cite specific studies. You need to be talking about revenue, finance, the language of business, which is accounting. So I know I sound like your dad trying to tell you the answer to life's questions, but so those were the books that I would suggest for everyone that we, I would say you cannot, if you only read 3 books next year and it's those 3, you'll be doing yourself well.
Well, before our viewers race to Amazon or any other book provider, might I add, if they do still exist, we've got a bit of a competition, haven't we, Liam? And we're going to be giving away ebooks because it is the season to be given. How can people win, Liam?
So we're going to give away Doug's 3 recommended books that he's just spoke about there. And all you need to do is comment in chat. If you just drop a comment into Facebook or YouTube, anywhere, that's all you need to do. And then you'll be eligible, and then we'll be in touch. And
do it.
Those books
do it. Do it. And yes, you will.
Now, where do they chat? Where should they chat? In YouTube or Facebook?
Yeah, both. Both is fine. Both is fine.
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, just get a comment in, and we will pick a lucky winner at random, and you will win 3 books. That's the way it's working. So yeah, good luck, ladies and gents. Good luck. Doug, we are at the end, and I've got to admit, it has been a jam-packed episode. Liam and I always enjoy our conversations with you, and it's always great to have you on here. I think the final thing we will do is we want to embrace a tradition on Fresh Movement Live, and we want to put you through the paces, I suppose. We tend to do this at the beginning, but we're going to do it now, and we call this the Fresh Fire Round. Liam, have we got another transition? There we go.
Fresh Fire Round. Now you should know that in my misspent youth, I was twice hospitalized from concussions sustained in boxing injuries. So as long as there's no tissue damage, bring it.
There's definitely not. There's definitely not. We will make this as simple as possible. All you need to do, Doug, at this stage, so we'll start slow, is pick a number between 1, 6, 7, or 8. So it can be one of them numbers: 1, 6, 7, or 8.
And do you want me to tell you what it is?
Just pick one, whichever number you're gravitating towards.
Okay, I've got it in my head. Am I supposed to tell you?
Yeah. I didn't make that very simple, did I? So that's me.
Hey, remember who you're talking to. The host of the Marketing Book Podcast is not the brightest bulb on the chandelier, but his guests are phenomenal. Okay, 7.
Good choice. Good choice.
Mickey Mantle's number.
So we've got
He was an
7.
American baseball player.
Mickey Mantle.
Yes.
Strong name. Okay, I've got the questions. So, Doug and the viewers, to ensure that you understand the rules, I'm going to read out 10 questions, and you have to answer them in the shortest time possible. Now, Liam has the timer at the bottom, and I suppose these are just your gut instinct. There's no right or wrong answer. They are all, I suppose, opinion based. So it's all about you. It's not about your knowledge on a subject.
Doug, you look really concerned. Or is he frozen? Gaz, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. I'm glitching out. What's happening? Doug's frozen though.